I just don't see if Israel can get out of this. And if Israel can't get out of this, to me, this seems like something that can truly bring down America, because America has just tied itself completely to Israel. It's amazing when I watch the news here, just the support for Israel,
Yeah.
no matter what, our greatest ally will do anything, and they're going to try to get us into this war with Iran. Even if this war doesn't happen right away, I just feel like Israel, there's no turning around, which means that if it goes down, I just feel like the United States goes down with it, and then everything goes down, and that's where things get really dangerous. Israel's got nuclear weapons. I feel like they will use it as they're going down. And so this to me is the scariest conflict, even though
Yeah.
it's not as in the forefront of people's mind. Do you
Yeah.
agree? I mean, what's your thought
Yeah.
on this?
Yeah. Again, I would say that I, it, again, it is possible that the conflict in Europe could go nuclear. We can't discount that possibility entirely. We can't discount it because there always can be accidents. Especially as we get these hypersonic weapons and medium range, missiles that only allow minutes for the other side to make a decision. Everybody, there could be, just as there was during the Cold War, there can be false readings by radar installations, and that can lead to, well, tragic. Actually, calling it tragic is an understatement. It could lead to the end of the world. It's not impossible. I think it's highly unlikely, but it's always there. And then again, there are these groups within Western Europe and factions within the U.S. administration that are absolutely committed to escalation and don't seem to have the healthy, necessary fear of nuclear war, and they could push us to the brink. It could happen, but I don't think it will. But on the other hand, it very I think it's really possible and much more likely to happen in the Middle East. And the reason I say that is that we have a nuclear power there, and I'm speaking of Israel, whose government is already kind of run by an apocalyptic cult. I don't think that's really much of an exaggeration. People like Smotrich and Ben Gvir, they they are the present in Israel. I mean, they are there in government with a lot of power. And Netanyahu is not a break on them at all. He's their ally. But they also represent the future. It seems like the trend has been going in their favor. And these are people that are willing to, destroy the Al-Aqsa temple.
Well,
And
that's the mosque and build the temple, right?
yeah, the Al-Aqsa mosque, rather, I should say. And to sacrifice the red heifer. These are the kind of people we're talking about. They have no fear. I think rather the opposite. I think they would love to use a nuclear weapon on Iran, and especially if in Iran, which may very well happen, if the Ayatollah there lifts the fatwa on building nuclear weapons. I mean, there are some over the last couple of months, there have been statements that suggest that at least that's the policy is being reconsidered. They have not actually. I don't think they ever had a nuclear weapons program. The CIA said they had one before 2003, but stopped it then. But I found Gareth Porter's argument convincing that they never had one. But they may actually begin one. And they do have the means to develop a nuclear weapon. They may just think that they have to for their own survival because the U.S. and Israel are hell-bent on destroying them. So if that happens and it becomes clear that they really are developing a nuclear weapon, I think the pressure within Israel to take out the program is going to be the nuclear weapons program in Iran is going to become overwhelming. And the thing is, I do not believe it can be done by conventional weapons. Again, these facilities are deep underground. They're in mountains, dispersed across a very large country. So they might go nuclear. They may try to use nuclear weapons to take out Iran's nuclear weapon program. But even short of that, it's just the other possibility, of course, is that that Iran and Israel go to war. So far it's been, there's been this exchange, but it's been going at a slow pace, and that may be just a conscious decision. I think it is actually by the Iranians. They really do not want to go up this escalation ladder, but they feel forced to do it. But on the Israeli side, now you have Netanyahu just feeling empowered by recent developments, especially in Syria, and with a great deal of support. He's seen his enemies fall one after another, and pretty much the last one on the list is Iran. And that's always been his obsession. So I think he's going to do what he can, to actually start a war. And now he feels with Trump in office, again, Trump has talked about and seems really to he really does want, I believe, to end the war in Ukraine. I don't think he's going to succeed at all, but he does appear to have that desire. He doesn't have that same desire for the Middle East, unfortunately. He has bought into the Zionist view of things, and I think he will. There's always a chance with Trump that he may just do a 180, but I think probably he's going to give full backing. Even it's not like Biden didn't give his full backing, but it'll be even quick. He'll be even quicker to support, let's say, the Israelis in the Middle East, which of course can mean war with Iran.
Right, and war with Iran means, I think, the end of Israel. Right, I mean, there's just no, like, Israel's a tiny country, and what we've seen Iran, its capability to launch these missiles and strike Israel at will, essentially. What we saw was just a taste, from what I imagine. From my understanding, they have thousands of these missiles,
right?
And they've been very careful about not inflicting casualties on Israel, giving them warning, hitting military targets. But if we have an all-out war and we see Israel do something, like you said, if they use a nuclear weapon to try to take out a nuclear facility in Iran, that's the end, right? You can't just use a nuke and walk away, right? I mean, you're done. You're done, right? I mean, you use a nuclear weapon on a country like this, and that is allied very closely with Russia and economically, and so I believe there are joint military exercises with China as well, right? I mean, Iran, China, and Russia, that's a bloc that cannot be defeated by anybody, in my opinion. So if this happens, this is why, in my opinion, this conflict in the Middle East is actually the most important one, and it's kind of been fading a little bit from the forefront. But this is something that is,
right?
It continues, and like you said, all trends are showing within Israel with Ben Gvir and Smotrich. This is the new phase of Israel, because what we've seen is there's been a million Israeli Jews that have left the country, but the people that stay, we're having a concentration of the extremists. Especially, we're seeing just we've talked before about sort of the demographics of Israel and how the settler movement, they have very large families, and it's their mission to create greater Israel, to take these lands, to start this. So we're seeing, I think there's no turning the ship around for Israel. You can't get more secular, rational Jews coming back into Israel, especially at this point, who wants to go there, unless you truly believe in the idea that we are part of a holy war, that this is a crusade, that we do need to create greater Israel, that this is, the apocalypse is not something to be afraid of.
It's something to embrace. Yeah, we win in the apocalypse. I mean, I think that's the notion that's spreading within Israel. Oh yeah, no, it's a very dangerous situation. Again, I don't know how things would play out in a war, but yeah, it's no question that Iran can do terrific damage to Israel and to American military assets throughout the Middle East. Both naval and land based. It would be a huge mess. It would be, and either the thing is, like, with a real war, if Iran is held back, I mean, I think it's clearly acted with great restraint so far. But if they find themselves under kind of a true full scale attack by the U.S. and Israel, that they'll have their backs to the wall, and then they're going to fight for their own, for their existence. And the thing is that that could and I think they would, if that happens, they'll do a great deal of damage, both to U.S. military assets and to Israel. And then Israel will find its back against the wall, and then there's a chance it'll go nuclear. And then I'm just not making any predictions after that. But it's
right,
just,
or the U.S. gets fully dragged in. Like, this is
right.
what I see. I don't see the U.S. getting dragged into war over in Ukraine.
Yeah.
I don't see this blowing up to World War III. We just see that there's no real support, within the populations. The elites obviously are their own, but they can't.
Yeah, there are
conscript.
Right.
Yeah, right.
That's what we pointed out. Yeah, that's right. You just don't have the base for that, because in the end, if you're really going to turn the tide, in Ukraine, you need to actually send in soldiers. You have to have boots on the ground, and I just don't see that happening. There's just not the support for that. Nobody in Europe or the U.S. wants to do that. Go and fight Russians. But unfortunately, there are people that think that way within this country. They say we would go and fight the Iranians on behalf of Israel.
Right.
Unfortunately, we do have that. So
it's amazing that we have both of these conflicts happening at the same time, and it puts the U.S. in such a weaker state, because we have really drained a lot of our military through the Ukraine war. We have seen that we don't, especially when it comes down to interceptors. I mean, that's really what these new modern warfare is. It's the ability to shoot missiles and intercept them.
Right, especially a war against Iran. It would be heavily dependent on interceptors, and it's clear that we have that we're
huge
very
shortage.
short of them. Right, and
because of what we've done in Ukraine.
Right. Yeah, and then again, so it would. There's some. Clearly, these, but again, we know like the production figures for something like the SM-3, it's supposed to be like a dozen a year. For the Patriot, it's supposed to be something like 550. And
you have to fire 2 Patriot interceptors.
Right, and they obviously often don't hit, their targets. Each one costs $4 million. The stockpiles have been reduced to just nothing. I think they are just drawing off production right now. So if you actually came into a shooting war, like in the first couple of volleys, the U.S. would have missiles and the Israelis would have some missiles, and then they would, essentially their chambers would be empty. They wouldn't have any more bullets to fire. It would just,
it's just madness. And then if you think about, Russia and China behind Iran and their production capacity, I mean, if Russia's outproducing all of NATO like 5-1 in most munitions, once China turns on its factories, we're talking about 100-1. It's just absurd that we're even entertaining this. But it seems inevitable that this is what's going to happen. I just don't see this Middle East war. I don't see an off ramp. We've talked about this before, so it just feels like this is where we're headed, and this will bring down the U.S. empire, which I guess is a good thing, but
well, we don't
just in such a horrible, violent way, I'm just thinking, will millions die? What's going to happen to America, to Europe? Will we see just everything break apart and just chaos across the country?
But you can also see it would be nice again if the U.S. just sobered up and said, okay, this kind of being the hegemon didn't make sense, but there may be this failing out and this, increasingly desperate attempts to maintain hegemony. That's the real danger. So I don't think.
And
it's
the more
likely.
Probable path, don't you agree?
I think so too. Yeah. And I would just say, I just wanted to add about Iran. Russia and China, I don't think will become involved directly, but just as both China and Iran have a vested interest in Russia's victory, they do not want to see Russia defeated, because again, they know if Russia were defeated, they would be next, right? That's just logic. But it's the same. The logic goes it's the same for Iran. Both China and Russia do not want and will make sure that Iran is not defeated. Because if Iran is defeated, then they know that the West, the hegemons, are going to train their guns on them, and they'll be able to concentrate more resources on bringing them down. Right. So there's this, that's
it's just this insanity that we have to take out Russia, Iran, China, and within the U.S. establishment, It's just about which one do we want to focus on. That's all it is, and it's just
unfortunately,
so crazy.
That seems to be true, right?
And it's suicidal. None of those are viable options, and they shouldn't even be considered.
Yeah,
like
why?
Why? Like,
yeah, exactly.
We've been trading with China. There's nothing. But it comes back to that mindset that I mentioned that my Norwegian friend was saying, like that there is this hegemonic mindset that's like, well, if there has to be a top dog. If we're not top dog, then we'll be ruled by China. We'll be ruled by Russia.
Yeah.
It's just such a stupid way of thinking.
Right.
But it's that's how a lot of people think, though.
Yeah. Well, that's the way that a lot of the neocons think too. I know that's they put forth their arguments is basically if the U.S. doesn't rule the world, some other country will. It's likely to be China, and we don't want that. Mearsheimer himself, even though Mearsheimer actually supported the U.S. military vis-a-vis China, he has admitted that actually China has never shown the desire to be a global hegemon. It's just never been anything, not in the past nor in the present. They're just interested in, being the hegemon in East Asia there, which doesn't mean they have to rule over a country, but they have a sphere of influence. And that's it. They have shown no intention. It's never been part of their ideology, to conquer the world. It's not like what you see in the U.S., again, with the neocon ideology, the whole world has to, accept our way of life and align themselves with us. They don't think that way. So there's, it's silly, but I think it's a projection. You kind of assume that, we know that's the way we think. So they must be thinking the same thing. So if we lose, they're going to be, here pressuring us to adopt Chinese ways. And it's just they couldn't care less, be honest.
No, yeah, it's actually, I feel like it's the opposite. I lived in China for over 10 years, and the Chinese have a great admiration for the West. And they love stereotypes. You talk to the Chinese, like, oh, the British, they're all gentlemen. I'm like, you need to go to UK. These lads out, they're not. But the same thing with like, oh, I love France. They have these very stereotypes. And they kind of love basically the multipolar concept. They like the idea of these different cultures and these civilizations, essentially.
Right.
They have no desire. They got 1.4 billion people. They have enough problems on their own hands.
Yeah, just holding themselves together. That's right.
Right. The rivalries are just between Shanghai and Beijing. Those types of things. Like, which is Shanghai's the better city by far. But
okay.
There is. I've never heard any type of talk from the Chinese ever in my 10 plus years about the idea that we're going to be number one. They don't even think that way. That's not their desire. Actually, it's often when I go taxi drive, they're like, "Oh, America, great! Oh, no, that's they have a great admiration for all these other countries and civilizations. There's no idea of that we need to have primacy over the world. That's an American concept, Western U.S. hegemony,
and it's a recent American concept. It's not the original American concept. This was spoken about,
right? Okay, all right. Well, we'll end it there, Dan. We've gone a bit over. Okay, have a good rest of your day.
You too.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.